The first thing Isabella Chambers heard each morning was not birdsong, nor carriage wheels, nor the gentle stirring of a London house waking with the sun. It was the soft, decisive click of her mother's watch being shut. Lady Maud always checked the time before she checked her daughter. "Up," she said from the doorway, gloved already though it was barely 8. "Mrs. Ellery will bring your tea in the blue room. You will wear the pearl grey silk for the Calloways at 11, luncheon at 1, the fitting at 3, the Fortescues at 7. Isabella sat up, gathering the coverlet at her throat, though no modesty was required in front of Lady Maud, only discipline. "Yes, mamma." Lady Maud's gaze moved over her as if reading inventory. "You will smile. You will accept. You will not improvise." It was a phrase she used often enough to become household law. When the door closed, Isabella let out a breath she had not known she held. The room around her was luxurious in a way that somehow never felt warm. Polished walnut, French paper, silver-backed brushes with her initials chased into the metal. Everything chosen for her, nothing offered to her. By 9, she was seated in the morning room across from her mother, who was already halfway through correspondence. Letters lay in strict piles by colour of wax, red for legal, black for social, green for accounts. Lady Maud slid a small ledger toward Isabella without lifting her eyes. Household disbursements for Bond Street and the Mews. Copy to clean book. Isabella took it, and her fingers woke in the way they never did over embroidery or dance cards. Numbers settled her. Patterns spoke. She could read a quarter's anxiety in the spacing of entries, smell a lie in a rounded figure. Her late father had let her sit beside him at 14 while clerks explained freight insurance and delayed payments from Liverpool firms. She had asked 3 questions and caught an error in underweight declarations that had escaped men twice her age. After he died, Lady Maud dismissed those clerks and told Isabella that mercantile talk made a young woman coarse. Still, the ledgers kept appearing when no one was watching, perhaps because Lady Maud trusted no one entirely, not even the men she paid. At noon came Julian Fortescue's card, then Julian himself, all polished boots and easy laughter. In the drawing-room, with footmen moving like furniture and Lady Maud seated upright in approval, he was courtly perfection. "Miss Chambers," he said, bending over Isabella's hand, "London brightens in your presence." In private, he mostly discussed horses, parliamentary gossip he scarcely understood, and the inconvenience of waiting for settlements and signatures. He liked speaking of our future seat and our household style, and always as if she were already an ornament in rooms he intended to own. He had never once asked her opinion on anything that cost more than flowers. Yet society praised the match. Lady Maud's daughter with the Viscount's son. Beauty to title, money to lineage, the old arithmetic. Isabella had accepted because refusal had never been presented as a possible action. Her consent had been managed like her allowance, scheduled, supervised, and granted in measured portions. That evening, as Julian talked amiably about the pre-wedding dinner his mother insisted on hosting, Lady Maud watched Isabella over the rim of her teacup. "You are fortunate," Lady Maud said after he left. "Remember that. Men of consequence are not patient with uncertainty." "Is that what I am?" Isabella asked before she could stop herself. "An uncertainty?" Lady Maud set her cup down with care. "You are an investment nearing maturity. Do not sentimentalize the process." The words should have shocked her. Instead, they landed where so many others had landed, on a surface already bruised. 3 nights later, the Fortescues' dining room blazed with candlelight and approval. 40 guests sat beneath painted ceilings while silver reflected crystal, and crystal reflected faces trained to look pleased with one another. Isabella wore white satin too bridal for propriety and not bridal enough to be mocked. Lady Maud had chosen it. Julian sat 2 places away, the better to be observed, crossing the distance with his attentions. He did so once during the fish course, leaning in to murmur something about the orchestra at St. James and whether she preferred Strauss or Sullivan. It did not matter which she answered. He nodded as though she had said exactly what he wished. By dessert, conversation had loosened into public intimacy. Uncles discussing investments too loudly, matrons discussing trousseau as if wars had never been fought over less consequential supplies. Isabella caught the words "Chambers' dowry" from the far end of the table, followed by a laugh quickly swallowed. Then the Viscount rose. So did Julian. The room thinned to silence with the speed of a blade. "My friends," Julian said, one hand on his wineglass, eyes fixed somewhere over Isabella's shoulder. "It is with sincere regret that I announce a necessary change in arrangements between Miss Chambers and myself." No one moved. A spoon dropped near the sideboard and was snatched up by a trembling footman. Julian continued, smooth as varnish. "Recent clarifications regarding certain financial instruments have revealed an unfortunate misalignment of expectations. In light of that, we have, mutually of course, agreed to dissolve our engagement." He did not look at her once. The air pressed against Isabella's skin like wet wool. Around her, pity and curiosity bloomed in equal measure, each person calculating how quickly this humiliation could be retold and where. Lady Fortescue made a small, distressed sound. The Viscount frowned as if at a disappointing but understandable weather change. Lady Maud dabbed her mouth with her napkin and said, clearly enough for the table nearest to hear, "How practical." Isabella turned to her, stunned. "Mamma." "Do not make a spectacle," Lady Maud said softly, not unkindly, which was worse. "You are still visible." Julian resumed his seat to murmured consolation from his aunt. Across polished mahogany, he accepted sympathy for ending his own betrayal. The rest of dinner passed in the brittle unreality of theatre after a stage fire. People spoke because silence would have admitted what they had witnessed. When the carriage door closed on mother and daughter, Lady Maud adjusted her gloves. "This is inconvenient," she said. Isabella stared at her. "He cast me off in a room full of people. He corrected a financial error before legal commitments deepened. One might call it efficient." Lady Maud looked out the window. "You will stop trembling. It reads as weakness." At home, Isabella stood in the entrance hall while servants pretended not to hear. Lady Maud removed her hat and handed it to a maid. "As you have failed to secure the match, you are no longer required in town this season. You will leave in 2 days for Greythorn Hall." "Greythorn?" Isabella repeated. The old estate in Sussex had not been properly occupied in years. "You will serve as temporary companion to your great-aunt Eugenia. Unpaid, naturally. You may remain there until you become useful again." Isabella felt something inside her go still, then hard. "You are sending me away like a dismissed governess." Lady Maud met her eyes for the first time that night. "A dismissed governess is paid wages. You are being granted lodging. Be grateful." She turned and climbed the stairs. Isabella stood alone beneath the chandelier, hearing in her head the click of a watch closing. The train to Sussex smelled of coal smoke and damp wool. Isabella sat by the window with one trunk, one maid too junior to be curious, and a headache that began behind her eyes, and did not leave. The city thinned into fields, then hedges, then the wide, indifferent grey of late autumn countryside. Greythorn Hall rose out of that grey like a memory no one wanted. Its stone facade had once aspired to grandeur, Now ivy crawled over cracked windows, and one chimney leaned in a way that made Isabella instinctively step back as she descended from the carriage. Inside, the air carried beeswax, dust, and neglect. Great-aunt Eugenia proved less tyrant than Relic, tiny, sharp-nosed, wrapped in shawls, and pleased chiefly by being read to in the afternoons. "Maud sends me people the way she sends flowers," she said on Isabella's first evening. "Too late and arranged too tightly." Isabella nearly laughed. The household was small: 2 maids, a cook with bad knees, a steward named Mr. Pike, who bowed too low and answered questions too quickly, and a newly hired head gardener replacing a man dead last winter. "Nate Carter," the housekeeper said. "From up north, I think. Keeps to himself. Works like a machine." She saw him the next morning in the lower gardens, sleeves rolled, forearms muddy to the elbow as he reset storm-damaged edging stones. He was too broad-shouldered for elegance and moved with the economical precision of someone trained to conserve effort for harder work. A faded scar cut through one eyebrow. When he straightened, his gaze met hers without flinching, without the deferential dip most servants offered automatically. "Miss Chambers," he said, "you know me?" Everyone knows who arrives in the family carriage. His voice was level, not insolent, merely unadorned. It unsettled her more than rudeness might have. "You're the new head gardener," she said. "So they tell me." A corner of her mouth twitched despite herself. "Do they often tell you what you are?" "Less than they assume." He set down his trowel. "If you've got sense, don't sign anything Mr. Pike brings you without reading the old books first." Isabella blinked. "Excuse me." He looked past her toward the yew-walk where no one stood, then back to her. "Land records here have been altered, dates changed, boundaries nudged, rents diverted." He spoke like a man listing weather. "Maybe it's sloppiness, maybe not." Before she could frame another question, he picked up the trug and walked off toward the orchard, leaving muddy prints on the stone path and a warning lodged beneath her ribs. That afternoon, a letter from Lady Maud arrived, as punctual as accusation. "You will find enclosed a transfer acknowledgement regarding dormant holdings attached to Greythorn and associated London receipts. Sign and return by Friday. You have no standing. Sign. MC, no inquiry after health. No mention of the dinner. Only instruction." Isabella read the line again. "You have no standing." For years she had believed this in practical terms, if not legal ones. Her allowance came through Lady Maud. Her social life dictated. Her engagement arranged and erased without her consent. Standing was a fiction purchased by other people's signatures. But Nate Carter's warning and the steward's 2 smooth answers rubbed against that fiction, like flint on steel. After supper, when Great-aunt Eugenia slept and the hall settled into groans and cooling pipes, Isabella took a candle and went to the old estate office at the end of the east corridor. Mr. Pike had called it "not worth troubling over." The key, however, had turned too easily in the lock to suggest disuse. Dust lay thick on the high shelves. Spiders had claimed 2 corners, yet on the desk, one ledger was conspicuously clean. She opened it. At first glance, nothing dramatic. Tenant rents, repairs, timber sales. Then the numbers began to snag her eye. A rent stream from West Cleft cottages that vanished for 3 quarters, then resumed under a different heading. A signature on a quarry lease that resembled her father's hand but slanted wrong on the capitals. A notation in newer ink inserted between older entries, shifting a boundary marker by clerical correction. Clerical correction was how theft learned to wear respectable shoes. She fetched 2 more books from the shelf and compared entries by candlelight until wax dripped on her cuff and midnight rang from the chapel clock. The discrepancies multiplied. Small sums here, delayed remittances there, rights assigned temporarily and never reclaimed. Not chaos, pattern. Someone had been bleeding Greythorn carefully, expecting no one to look close enough to notice. She sat back, pulse loud in her throat. If she signed Lady Maud's transfer, whatever this was would be sealed beyond challenge. She would be giving away claims she did not understand to people who preferred she remain ornamental and ignorant. If she refused, Lady Maud could cut her allowance entirely, isolate her, call her unstable, ungrateful, hysterical. Words society kept ready for women who read their own documents. From outside came the faint scrape of boots on gravel below the office window. She moved to the glass and saw, in the courtyard gloom, Nate crossing from the tool shed toward the side gate, carrying no lantern and walking as if darkness belonged to him. Not a common gardener's habit. Trust pricked at her from one side, suspicion from the other. At breakfast, Mr. Pike presented the transfer papers with a sympathetic tilt of the head. "Your lady mother asked me to assist in expediting matters, miss. Merely housekeeping." Isabella folded the documents and set them beside her plate. "How diligent of you, Mr. Pike. I should like to review supporting records first." His smile thinned. "There really is no need to burden yourself." "I insist," he bowed. "As you wish." Great Aunt Eugenia, buttering toast with arthritic determination, glanced between them and said mildly, "When men say there is no need, child, there is always need." Isabella met her aunt's watery but alert eyes and felt, for the first time in weeks, something steadier than humiliation. Not hope, not yet, purpose. That night she returned to the ledgers with sharpened pencils, scrap paper, and a resolve no one had granted her permission to possess. Outside, wind moved through the yews like whispered argument. Inside, she drew columns, matched dates, circled names. At the top of a fresh page she wrote, in clear, deliberate hand, "Questions before signature." Then she paused and beneath it added a second line. "What is mine, and who decided otherwise?" The candle guttered, recovered, and threw her shadow long across the desk, as Isabella stared at the words she had just written. "What is mine, and who decided otherwise?" A soft knock sounded against the office doorframe. She turned sharply, one hand over the page. Nate stood there, hatless, shoulders filling the narrow opening. "Still awake." "So are you." His glance dropped to the spread ledgers, then to her ink-stained fingers. "Good. Means I don't have to pretend surprise." She should have sent him away. Instead, she said, "You told me not to sign. I'm trying to determine why." He stepped inside and closed the door behind him with care, as if even old wood might carry tales. "Because housekeeping is what men call it, when they move fences in the dark." Isabella angled one ledger toward him. "West Cleft rents disappear for 9 months, then return under miscellaneous agricultural receipts. That cannot be accidental." "No," he said, "it's laundering." She looked up at that word, so precise, so unsentimental. "You speak as if you've seen it done." "I've seen most things done." His finger, rough with soil and old scars, tapped an entry she had circled. "There. Quarry rights reassigned. Whoever wrote this tried to copy your father's hand, but forgot he looped his lowercase y only on formal signatures." She felt a quick, involuntary flare of respect, and suspicion threaded through it. A gardener who studies penmanship? A man who reads what keeps roofs standing. He straightened. "If you want proof, not hunches, you'll need tithe maps, tenancy rolls, and statements from people who pay rent in coin, not in ledger ink." Isabella folded her hands so he would not see how they trembled with adrenaline. "And where would I find all that?" in places Mr. Pike doesn't expect you to look. By morning, Greythorn had learned that Miss Chambers had become interested in old papers, and the house responded as houses do when power shifts by an inch. Doors were slower to open, voices lower when she entered, silence quicker when she spoke. Mr. Pike arrived in the breakfast room with his usual polished concern. "If you require anything from the records room, miss, I'd be pleased to have a clerk gather it for you." "No need," Isabella said, buttering toast she did not want. "I prefer my own hands." His smile stayed in place while his eyes hardened. "Dust can be very unpleasant." "Then we shall both sneeze, Mr. Pike." Great-aunt Eugenia gave a dry chuckle into her tea. The records room yielded 3 worm-eaten map tubes, 2 cracked deed books, and 1 locked iron cabinet for which Pike claimed no key existed. By noon, Isabella had found the key hanging on a labelled peg in his office. Muniments. East. That afternoon she walked the north boundary in damp wind with Nate and a tenant farmer named Mr. Dobbins, who removed his cap each time he addressed her and called every disputed field, "Same as my father's day, begging pardon." Nate carried a measuring chain and a folded survey sheet so old the creases threatened to split. At a fallen marker stone, he crouched and brushed away moss. Boundary should run from this point to the ash by the brook. Pike's revised chart bends it 12 yards east. 12 yards is not much, Dobbins muttered. Not once, Isabella said, hearing herself think in columns, but across 6 parcels and 15 years. Enough to swallow grazing rights, Nate answered. Later, when Dobbins had gone and rain began in a thin, persistent mist, Isabella said, "You use legal terms very comfortably for a man hired to prune roses." Nate did not look at her. "An easement dispute ruined my father. I learned the language that ruined him." The words were simple, too simple. She could not tell whether they were truth or shield. For a week she lived between ledgers and lanes. Mornings with Aunt Eugenia reading sermons neither of them listened to. Afternoons with tenants who spoke only after she promised she was not there to collect arrears. Nights at the East Corridor desk, tracing money from one false heading to another. Patterns sharpened. Rents from 3 cottages rerouted through a shell account in Lewis. Timber sold twice on paper, once in fact. Mineral rights beneath Lower Bram Field listed as dormant, though a rail spur had been surveyed less than 2 miles away. Her father's name appeared and reappeared, sometimes in his hand, sometimes in an imitation that improved over time. Nate helped when she asked, never when she did not, and always in ways that made him harder to place. He knew which parish clerk drank enough to talk, which tenant kept rent receipts wrapped in oilcloth beneath a hearthstone, which magistrate disliked Pike, and why. He could identify military shorthand in a warehouse invoice and then spend an hour grafting apple stock without saying a word. And he vanished. "West Orchard drainage," the undergardener said once when she asked where the head gardener had gone. "South Coppice fence," said another on a different day. Yet she had walked both places and found no sign of him. Lady Maud's letters arrived with increasing regularity and decreasing pretense. Sign the transfer. Delay invites scrutiny. Scrutiny invites gossip. Your allowance is suspended pending your cooperation. You have no standing. Sign. The third letter enclosed a note from Chambers and Wythe Bank confirming that discretionary household disbursements to Miss Isabella Chambers were temporarily paused by instruction of acting executor Lady Maud Chambers. Isabella read that one twice, then handed it to Aunt Eugenia, who sniffed and said, "Maud always did mistake custody for ownership." Practical consequences came quickly. Her maid informed her, mortified, that suppliers in the village had begun to decline credit. Pike mentioned at dinner, too casually, that financial uncertainty might require reductions in Greythorn's staffing if London funds remained complicated. The threat was clear. Sign or servants lose places, and tenants lose leverage, and everything becomes her fault. 2 days later, a visiting baronet's wife called to pay respects and left after 20 minutes with enough fresh scandal to feed 3 drawing rooms. Isabella heard the coachman ask the footman at the gate, not quietly, whether the jilted one has gone odd with account books. By evening, a local paper carried a column on an unfortunate young lady in Sussex contesting household guidance beyond her capacity. She sat with that clipping beside her untouched supper until Nate appeared at the terrace doors, rain on his coat. "You look like you'd rather set fire to Fleet Street," he said. "I would settle for correcting 1 column at a time." He came in only when she nodded. "Then stop writing to people who profit from calling you unstable. Collect sworn statements. Facts are harder to sneer at." From tenants frightened of eviction? From tenants owed money. Fear turns to courage when there's arithmetic attached. She almost smiled. "You really are an unusual gardener." His jaw shifted, a private tension she had begun to recognize. "You really are an unusual lady." Before she could answer, Mr. Pike entered with the smooth timing of a man who had been waiting just outside earshot. "Miss Chambers, a caller has arrived unexpectedly from London." Julian Fortescue stood in the morning room as if painted there. Perfect coat, sympathetic eyes, gloves held in one hand like an offering to grief. "Isabella," he said softly, stepping forward. "I heard you were unwell, distressed. I came at once." She remained by the door. "How generous!" His expression flinched, then recovered. "You must know I never wished you pain. Circumstances at dinner were complicated. My father insisted—" "At dinner," she said, "you called me a misalignment." Julian exhaled as though she were being emotional in an inconvenient key. "I spoke poorly, but perhaps we can be sensible now. There are rumors your father's disputed accounts may be regularized. If so, there is no reason our understanding could not be revisited." Nate, still near the terrace, had gone absolutely still. Isabella looked at Julian and saw, with almost clinical clarity, the mechanism beneath the charm. Assess asset, mitigate embarrassment, reacquire if value rises. "Thank you for your concern," she said. "I am occupied." Julian's gaze slid past her to Nate and back. "With gardening advice?" "With work," she said. "Good day, Mr. Fortescue." His mouth tightened. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "For whom?" He had no answer that could survive daylight. He bowed and left. That night, the iron cabinet in the records room stood open when she arrived. The deed packet she had marked with ribbon, Lower Bram Minerals, was missing. She went straight to Pike's office. "Where is it?" He blinked blandly. "Where is what, miss?" "The Bram deed packet removed from a locked cabinet." "Surely you have misplaced it. Old papers do migrate." "Paper does not walk." His smile returned, thinner than before. "When ladies involve themselves in clerical matters, confusion is common." Isabella stepped closer until he had to tilt his head down to meet her eyes. "Confusion would be believing I cannot count pages." For the first time, his confidence flickered. She did not sleep. Before dawn, she found Nate in the stable yard checking harness straps by lantern light. "The Bram deeds are gone," she said. He swore once, quietly. "Then he knows what you found." "He knows I'm looking. I'm not sure he knows how much." Nate considered, then said, "There's an old potting shed behind the West Glasshouse. Your grandfather used it for seed ledgers and duplicate maps before Pike's predecessor centralized records. If anything survived, it might be there. And you neglected to mention this earlier because—" Because I wasn't sure what you'd do with it. His gaze held hers, unflinching. Now I am. The west glass house had half its panes patched with board, and the other half filmed white with old lime. Behind it, the potting shed sagged under ivy and years. The lock resisted, then gave with a groan that sounded like complaint. Inside, broken pots, rotted twine, shelves of mildewed almanacs, and a workbench thick with dust except for one clean rectangle near the wall. Isabella knelt and ran her fingers along the skirting board. A seam. "Here," she said. Nate brought a pry bar. The panel lifted, revealing a narrow cavity and, within it, a leather dispatch box banded in brass. Not estate issue. Too fine, too deliberate. A cipher plate was affixed beneath the handle. Crown over crossed swords. War Office. She looked at Nate. He did not reach for the box. "Open it." The key was absent, but the clasp had been left only half caught. Inside lay folded correspondence, coded memoranda, a small pistol wrapped in oilcloth, and a signet ring in a linen pouch engraved with a crest she did not recognize, a veil between two hawks, surmounted by a marquis's coronet. On top sat a commission copy, its heading unmistakable. Lord Nathaniel George Vale, Marquis of Rydal, attached by confidential direction. The rest blurred for a moment, then sharpened with painful clarity. Investigation of procurement fraud, shipping contracts, false domestic directives, names of firms and intermediaries, Chambers-affiliated forwarding houses, a Fortescue Cousins brokerage, Julian's uncle, Sir Adrian Fortescue, noted in the margin twice. Isabella set the paper down with great care before her hands betrayed her. "Nate Carter," she said, voice very quiet. How convenient he was. He removed his cap, though no ceremony was required in a potting shed. "I intended to tell you when I had enough evidence to protect witnesses." "You intended," she repeated, "like everyone else in my life." "Isabella." "No." Anger rose, clean and hot, burning through weeks of restraint. "Do not use my name as if we are intimates built on honesty. You watched me be threatened, belittled, baited into signing away my rights, and all the while you were collecting your own dossier. I was also helping you keep those rights. Because it served your mission." His jaw tightened. "At first, yes." The admission hit harder for being unvarnished. She laughed once without humour. "At first, how reassuring." Outside, wind rattled the loose panes of the glass house like distant applause. Nathaniel, she corrected bitterly, stood motionless, giving her space to strike if she wished. She wanted to. With words, with paper, with every silence he had chosen. Finally he said, low and steady, "If I had arrived as Marquis of Rydal, Pike would have burned every ledger by supper, and your mother's partners would have shifted funds before dawn. A peer opens drawing rooms. He closes mouths. Nate Carter heard things a marquis never would. That explains strategy," she said, "not deception." "You are right." It disarmed her more than argument could have. She held up one memorandum. "Procurement fraud tied to army uniforms, rail steel, ship stores, through firms linked to my family." "To your mother's partners," he corrected, "and to Fortescue interests. I didn't know how far it reached when I came. I know now." "You used Greythorn as cover." "I used the truth as cover. Records were being altered here. Money was being siphoned here. You were being pressured to legalize it." She turned away before he could read too much in her face. Betrayal warred with vindication, and beneath both sat the ugly relief of finally understanding why he never quite fit the role assigned him. Bootsteps sounded outside, quick, uncertain. Mr. Pike appeared at the shed door, saw the open dispatch box, and went pale enough to show every vein at his temples. "Miss Chambers, my lord, I can explain." "My lord," Isabella said softly. Pike swallowed. "Get out," Nathaniel said. Pike backed away without bowing. Silence returned, harsher than before. Before either could speak, wheels crunched on gravel in the West Drive. A carriage had come up too fast for social calling. Within minutes, the housekeeper arrived, breathless, at the shed threshold. "Miss Chambers, sir, there is a solicitor from London insisting on immediate audience. He has church papers and says it concerns your legal person." Isabella wiped potting soil from her palms onto her skirts and walked to the front hall on legs that felt both heavy and oddly detached from her. The man waiting there was lean, silver-haired and damp from travel, his black bag clutched as if it contained volatile chemicals. He bowed. "Miss Isabella Chambers, I am Mr. Alastair Hume of Fenchurch and Bale, retained by trustees of the Wrexham settlement. I regret the urgency, but delay has become legally hazardous." "Legally hazardous to whom?" she asked. "To you, my lady." She stared. "You are mistaken." "I am not." He opened the bag, removed a parish registry extract, then a sealed certificate with wax, impressed by a diocesan court. "Your father, Henry Chambers, contracted a lawful first marriage in 1868 to Lady Eleanor Ashcombe, sole surviving child of the 7th Earl of Wrexham. Their issue," his eyes lifted to hers, "was one daughter, Isabella Eleanor Chambers, born 1870, baptized at St. Jude's, Blackheath." Great-aunt Eugenia had come into the hall, shawl clutched at her throat. She made a small, stricken noise. Mr. Hume continued with professional gentleness. "Lady Eleanor died in childbed complications shortly after your birth. Mr. Chambers later married Lady Maud. By terms of the Wrexham remainder and subsequent trust confirmations, the earldom and attached estates passed to the legitimate issue of Lady Eleanor. That issue is you." The edges of the hall seemed to tilt, then steady. "No," Isabella said, though not in denial, in recalculation. "I was told—" "You were told what served your guardians," Hume said carefully. "Lady Maud was appointed managing executrix during your minority and styled social parent without legal challenge. Certain documents were suppressed. We have recovered certified copies." He placed the marriage certificate in her hands. The paper was thick, the ink old, the signatures clear. Henry Chambers, Eleanor Ashcombe, witnesses long dead. Not invention. Fact. From the staircase landing, Nathaniel had stopped, silent as judgment. Mr. Hume drew one final document, ribboned in blue. "There is more. The Committee for Privileges has accepted preliminary proof. Pending formal reading, you are recognised in law as Isabella Eleanor, Countess of Wrexham in your own right." Countess. The word did not feel like elevation. It felt like a lock turning somewhere deep in a house she had lived in all her life without ever being given a key. Julian Fortescue had discarded her for status, and by law, by blood, by the very records they had hidden from her, she stood above him. No one spoke for several seconds after the word Countess settled in the hall. Then Isabella heard her own voice, very clear, very calm, as if it belonged to a woman standing a few feet to her left. "What must be done first, Mr. Hume?" The solicitor blinked once as if he had expected tears or disbelief. "Immediate preservation of evidence, my lady. Originals and certified copies both. Lady Maud will almost certainly challenge standing, chronology, and your competence to administer." "Of course she will," Great-aunt Eugenia whispered. Mr. Hume inclined his head. "And if she controls Greythorn's records before the trustees convene, she may delay recognition for months. Longer if documents disappear." At that, Nathaniel moved from the staircase into the centre of the hall, stripped now of any pretense of hired staff. Pike has already begun removing documents. We secure every room with paper. Mr. Hume's eyes sharpened at him. Lord Rydell, you know me? I know the name attached to 3 Treasury complaints no one could prove. Hume glanced at the dispatch papers still in Isabella's hands and seemed to make several decisions at once. Then we are past politeness. Isabella set the marriage certificate on the hall table, flattened one palm over it, and looked toward the doorway to Pike's office. Empty. Where is Mr. Pike? No one answered quickly enough. By the time footmen were sent to look, Pike was gone, along with his case, a riding coat, and the bay gelding usually kept for urgent errands. In his desk they found 2 things, a blank receipt book and a torn envelope addressed in Lady Maud's hand. By evening the first telegram arrived from London. To Miss Y. Chambers, Greythorne Hall. Do not act on fraudulent claims circulating regarding your birth. Return immediately. Documents await signature. Maud Chambers. A second followed within the hour, sent to the village postmaster and delivered by an apologetic boy who did not understand he was carrying a threat. Notice. No credit to be extended to Greythorne household, pending title dispute. By order, Chambers and Y the instruction of executrix. Cook stood in the passage, hands white with flour, and asked in a low voice whether wages would stop. If Lady Maud succeeds, Isabella said, all of this is sold in pieces. Wages, cottages, pensions, everything tied to your contracts can be voided as interim obligations. Cook swallowed. And if she doesn't? Isabella met her eyes. Then no one here will beg permission for what is lawfully theirs again. They worked deep into night. Hume dictated inventories while Isabella and the housemaids sealed packets in wax. Nathaniel sent a groom to Lewis with 2 certified copies and a letter for a magistrate he trusted. Then another to London, addressed not to a social acquaintance, but to a Crown Auditor's clerk. At midnight, Julian's card arrived by special rider, with a note folded around it in a hand Isabella had once mistaken for elegance. Whatever has been said can be corrected if you do not force this into public courts. My mother is prepared to receive you quietly. We can repair matters. J.F. She read it once and fed it to the drawing-room fire without comment. At 1:30, Mr. Hume came from the study with a face gone grave. My lady, one more development. A preliminary petition has already been filed in Chancery under Lady Maud's authority, asserting that you are misled by unscrupulous parties and requesting temporary extension of her executorship during review. On what grounds? Instability, isolation, undue influence. He looked briefly toward Nathaniel, then back, and claims that certain men on the premises misrepresented themselves to gain your confidence. Isabella laughed softly, with no mirth at all. How quickly reputations become legal instruments. Hume folded the petition copy. If she wins extension, she can freeze any transfer, seize household correspondence, and force tenant rents into her control pending inquiry. Nathaniel's voice went hard. Including the funds she's already bleeding into fraudulent contracts. Hume nodded. Exactly. Isabella pressed her fingertips into the edge of the table until pain steadied her. Everything she had begun to build, numbers aligned, tenants speaking, proof gathered from corners everyone assumed she would never enter, could be erased not by argument, but by delay. I want sworn statements at dawn, she said. Dobbins, Mrs. Keel from West Cleft, anyone with receipts? Hume hesitated. My lady, if this turns public before we anchor your status, your name will be dragged through every paper in London. It already is, she lifted her chin. Let them print. We proceed. The plan failed before breakfast. At 3 in the morning, smoke slipped under Isabella's bedroom door in a thin grey ribbon that smelled not of hearth fire, but of pitch. She woke coughing, yanked open the door, and saw flames rolling low along the east corridor ceiling, bright and hungry, moving towards the estate office. "Fire!" she shouted, pounding on the nearest doors. "Up, up, now!" The hall erupted. Bells clanged. Maids ran half-dressed, carrying blankets and boxes. Someone screamed that the records room was burning. Another voice shouted Aunt Eugenia was still in her chamber. Isabella ran toward the old wing and nearly collided with Nathaniel, already blackened with soot, coat wrapped over his mouth. "Not this way," he barked. "The ceiling's going. My aunt is there. I know." He pushed past her into the smoke before she could argue. Moments stretched to terror, then he emerged carrying Eugenia in both arms, her shawl singed, her face ash-grey and uncomprehending. 2 footmen took her. Nathaniel turned back immediately. "The dispatch box," Isabella said, already moved. "The ledgers." "Not all of them." A beam crashed somewhere ahead with a noise like musket fire. Heat slammed down the corridor. Isabella staggered back, eyes streaming. By dawn, the East office was gutted. The records room, the muniments cabinet, and the adjoining passage were a black ruin of warped iron and wet ash. Rain began just after first light, turning char to sludge. "Mister." Hume stood in the courtyard, hat in his hands, staring at what remained. Dear God. Isabella stepped over broken slate and looked through the burned doorway into the place where she had written, only nights before, questions before signature. There was no desk now, no chair, no shelf, just a collapsed corner and steam. "Was it an accident?" she asked, though she already knew. Nathaniel crouched near the threshold, touched 2 fingers to a metal can half hidden under debris, and lifted them slick with residue. He smelled it once. Lamp oil thickened with resin, poured along the corridor edge. Arson. A groom returned at noon with worse. The rider carrying sworn statements from 2 tenants had been stopped on the Lewis Road by gentlemen who claimed to be collecting legal packets for Chambers solicitors. The packet was gone. The rider had a broken wrist and no names. By afternoon, village talk had settled into certainty. Some said the fire was proof Isabella had gone mad with lawsuits. Some said Lord Rydell's men had burned records to hide their own theft. The Sussex Chronicle printed an extra sheet before supper. Greythorn Blaze destroys papers in disputed inheritance. Questions of female capacity rise. And at the bottom, a line from an unnamed family source. Miss Chambers has been in a state of agitation for weeks and may not be fit to direct estate affairs. Isabella read that one in the kitchen because it was the only room warm enough for everyone displaced from the ruined wing. She folded the paper once, neatly, and set it beside the breadboard. Cook pretended not to watch her. "Tea, miss?" "My lady," Hume corrected gently from the doorway. Cook flushed. "My lady." The title landed like irony while smoke still clung to the curtains. By evening, Mrs. Keel from West Cleft arrived sobbing. Her husband, who had kept 30 years of rent tallies and was meant to swear an affidavit the next day, had collapsed while helping bucket water at dawn and died before the doctor came. Another witness gone. No document could call him back. When night fell, Isabella stood alone in the chapel pew and let herself shake for the first time since the fire. If she had insisted sooner, if she had moved the records yesterday, if she had not believed there was time. The thought looped, merciless. She did not cry. She wanted to. Nothing came. Only the hard, nauseating awareness that her enemies were faster than she had allowed for, and people other than her were paying the price. Nathaniel found the old cavalry flask in his coat pocket and nearly threw it into the rain. He stood under the stable eaves, watching lantern light move across the yard, while men hauled salvaged trunks from the ruined wing. His hands would not stop trembling. He hid them by tightening the strap on a saddle that did not need tightening. He had seen fire before. Afghanistan had taught him the sound of timber when heat took it, the way men coughed once and then not again, the stink of tallow and wool and panic. He had also seen what procurement fraud did 2 years later, in barracks and field hospitals, when boots split in winter marches and uniforms rotted at the seams, because someone in London changed good leather for cheap and signed the difference as acceptable variance. His younger brother Thomas had not died in battle. Thomas had died of fever after trench foot turned black in government-issue boots that crumbled in mud. Nathaniel had read the contract numbers himself while identifying the body. That was why he took covert postings no one sane wanted. Not for patriotism polished for Parliament, but for the private, ugly need to find the men who called theft efficiency and called casualties unfortunate. And now, Isabella stood in the middle of the same machine, and he had put her there faster by lying to her face. Captain Reeves's coded telegram sat in his pocket, delivered an hour before. War Office concerned operation, compromised stop, press linking Riddell, name to private heiress, dispute, stop instructions, pending avoid public action, stop, avoid public action. He wanted to laugh. Public action was already at their gates with ink-stained teeth. Footsteps approached. Isabella, wrapped in a borrowed cloak, hair still smelling faintly of smoke, stopped beneath the eaves beside him. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." Neither moved. After a moment she asked, "Do you regret it?" He did not pretend to misunderstand. "Deceiving you?" "Yes." "Yes." The word came out rougher than he intended. And no. She turned to him sharply. He forced himself to keep speaking. "I regret every hour you believed I was less than I am, because it made you doubt your own judgment. I do not regret helping you find the truth. I do not regret staying." Rain thudded on slate. Somewhere a horse stamped. He looked at his hands finally, because he could not keep the mask in place and lie by omission again. "My brother died because men altered numbers on supply contracts and called it paperwork. I've spent 6 years pretending to be harmless in rooms where harm was balanced like accounts. I thought I could do this one cleanly, get proof, shield witnesses, walk away before anyone was burned by it." He swallowed. "I was wrong." Isabella's face shifted, anger and understanding crossing like weather fronts. "You are not responsible for every match struck tonight." "No," he said, "but I knew we were visible. I underestimated how quickly your mother would choose destruction over exposure." She leaned against the stable post, suddenly exhausted. "I underestimated her too. Maybe because some part of me kept expecting, not mercy exactly, but a limit. There is one," he said quietly. "It is just farther out than decent people imagine." For a long time they listened to rain and distant voices. Then Isabella said without looking at him, "I don't know if I can trust you yet." "You shouldn't," he answered. "Not on sentiment." That drew her eyes back to his. "Trust me on this instead. If they come for you under colour of care, they will try to isolate you first. No private interviews, no unsigned documents, no physician chosen by your mother." A humorless breath escaped her. "Still giving orders. Still trying to keep you alive." She nodded once. "Then stay near tomorrow. Not to lead, just near." He bowed his head, the closest he could come to a vow without making one she might not want. I can do that. They did not have until tomorrow. Lady Maud arrived at Greythorn just after dawn in a dark travelling carriage, flanked by 2 hired riders, and a hired confidence that made the servants step back from the front steps, as if rank itself were a storm front. She entered the morning room without removing her gloves. Behind her came Julian, pale and tight-mouthed. Mr. Pike, newly shaved and very upright. A barrister Isabella recognised from Chancery corridors, and a physician with a leather case, and the bland expression of a man paid to observe what he is told to observe. Lady Maud's gaze swept the room, paused on scorch marks along the far plaster, then settled on Isabella. "So," she said, "you've set the house on fire." Isabella remained standing beside the hearth, Mr. Hume at her shoulder. "Good morning, Mama." "Do not mama me in front of legal counsel." Lady Maud handed the barrister a folded document. "Read it." He cleared his throat. "Petition for protective interim administration, filed this morning before Vice-Chancellor Bramwell. Grounds: contested legitimacy, evidence tampering, susceptibility of Miss Isabella Chambers to coercion by parties misrepresenting identity and station. Pending full hearing, request immediate transfer of estate papers and temporary medical supervision of petitioner's person." "Petitioner's person," Isabella repeated. "How elegantly you phrase imprisonment." The physician opened his case and withdrew a notebook. "Miss Chambers, if you would submit to a short examination, this can be made very straightforward." Nathaniel stepped forward from the doorway. "She will not be examined without independent counsel present." Julian flinched at seeing him openly. Pike stared at the floor. Lady Maud's mouth thinned. "Lord Rydell, how industrious you have been among my shrubbery." Nathaniel said nothing. Lady Maud turned to Isabella again. "You have been manipulated by a man in disguise and a solicitor chasing fees. Sign a temporary return of authority and I will spare you public embarrassment." Mr. Hume produced his own papers. "My client is recognised by certified parish and diocesan records as Countess of Wrexham. Any temporary authority you seek must be argued before trustees with notice." "Trustees?" Lady Maud gave a small, cold laugh. "I have already petitioned for acceleration. Emergency sitting today, noon, in London, restricted attendance. If she fails to appear with admissible originals, the committee may continue current executorship pending inquiry." Hume went still. "Today?" Lady Maud's eyes glittered. "Did you think I would wait while she rehearsed rebellion in Sussex?" Isabella felt the room tighten around that one fact. Noon, London. Pike chose that moment to speak, voice rehearsed for sympathy. "I must add with regret that I witnessed Miss Chambers in agitated states over many nights, encouraged by Lord Rydell to interfere with accounts beyond her understanding." Nathaniel moved as if to cross the room. Isabella caught his sleeve first. "Let him lie," she said under her breath. "We need time, not satisfaction." Then Great-Aunt Eugenia appeared at the top of the staircase, supported by a maid, shawl pinned crookedly but chin lifted. "Lies," she said, thin voice carrying. "Maud has stolen from this house since before her widow's weeds were folded away." Lady Maud looked up, face briefly unreadable. "Aunt Eugenia, you are unwell. Please return to your room." Eugenia took one more step, opened her mouth to speak again, and crumpled. The maid screamed. Nathaniel was first to the stairs. The physician elbowed past with sudden, practical urgency. Minutes blurred into commands, salts, compresses. At last he straightened, grave. "She has suffered an apoplexy. She may recover speech. She may not. She cannot testify today." Lady Maud exhaled once, almost imperceptibly. Mr. Hume checked his watch with shaking fingers. "If we leave now with clear roads, we might reach Charing Cross by 11:40. Lady Maud lifted another paper. One more courtesy. Injunction filed in Lewes at 8 this morning. No estate records are to be removed from Greythorne pending jurisdictional determination. Hume paled. You blocked transport. I preserved evidence, Lady Maud corrected. Outside, wheels rattled in the drive. Constables this time, not riders. The senior officer entered, helmet under his arm. Lord Rydell, Miss Chambers, message from Home Office and County Court. He unfolded a telegram. Until questions of authority are resolved, all investigative actions connected to War Office inquiry are suspended on this property. No seizures, no arrests. Nathaniel's jaw locked. His operation had just been gagged in formal ink. The constable continued awkwardly. And Miss Chambers is ordered to present herself before trustees at noon if she wishes to contest interim administration. Silence fell so hard Isabella could hear the clock in the hall striking the quarter. Noon in London, burned records, a collapsed witness, an injunction chaining documents to the house, a mother who had moved every piece before breakfast. Lady Maud put her gloves back on, each finger smoothed with deliberate care. You wanted a forum, Isabella. You have one, if you can reach it.